Ain't got no sound. Kathy. Kathy.
You got your sound off.
That's why I brought you in here. I say we start all over. Do I leave?
Yeah, leave and go back. Start. It's down here.
Tim is muted. Thanks, Warren. Chris Childs is on here. Tim is muted.
I hope somebody knows, buddy.
Ah, so y'all didn't hear anything I had there?
No.
Well, I guess some people say that's pretty good. All right. Get everything laid out here. I was trying to get everybody on. Warren, you're still muted, I think.
Yeah, so I could. I'm back in.
All right. And I don't know if David Breeden has checked on. Jeremy is up in West Virginia, so. And I've got David. So that's about it. Well, tonight our topic that I wanted to throw out, maybe get some discussion. If you have some questions about things, you can put a comment on Facebook as well as on YouTube. And so the topic tonight is horizontal trees, horizontal storm trees, something that's blown over and working up horizontally. And so wanted to get some comments and things going on. I've got a few little slides and things to kind of show you here and talk about some issues that come about with storm damaged, wind thrown trees, as well as just thinking through the saw hazards that are there with that. So if we take a look at the planning steps on a horizontal that we talk about at some of the different things, and I know it seems kind of elementary, and really it is, but it is something that you have to think through these steps every cut that you attempt to make. First of all, looking on the site for any hazards that might come about, and then wherever you choose to start, that first cut that you make is, when I cut through it, is it going to move up or down? Is it going to move side to side? Is it going to move backwards or forwards? And then choose what type of a cut to make to be able to control that situation. And that's something that most people look at as being simple. I know I'm going to cut through right here, but the biggest issue when it comes to things under pressure, where you're talking about compression and tension, has to do with movement. And so, according to pressures of limbs or position of a log, how it could roll, all of those things come about. And so we have to make sure that we have a good understanding of those things. And a lot of people have some kind of negative experience when it comes to those types of conditions. But I've got some slides here. Chris Childs sent in a couple. And these are off of some sites that he had been on, but I don't know. So I still see. Are y'all picking up sound on me now?
Yes.
Okay, so that message must be old. I see one from David, but he says it's still muted. But I should be up and going now. But I see Chris checked in. So this first picture, maybe he can explain a little bit of it. But Chris, if you're on there, this is one of your pictures that you sent me yesterday. I think you're muted too. Chris, are you on? Maybe not. So I ask y'all, if you were to come across a situation like this, where would you start? What would you do? What would be your process in the plan?
Well, I think some of it depends on the equipment that you have available, such as a lift or skid steers or stuff like that. If you don't have equipment available, then you might approach this a little bit differently.
Okay.
Hey, I'm
Let's say-
fine with here.
Let's say that there's no equipment.
No equipment.
Chris, why don't you explain a little bit? So I see you're unmuted now. Explain a little bit about this tree, or two trees actually.
Yes, I was in Mississippi, just outside of Rolling Fork when we were down there. Tornado went through, and the whole neighborhood looked like that.
And so this is looks like two fairly large hardwoods, look like
Yeah.
oaks, probably a white oak and something else there. And
Yeah.
we've got limbs that are probably, say, 12, 14-inch diameter, coming up probably 25 feet or better.
Yes, sir.
Because the roof of the house, I would think, would probably be about 15, 18. So, a lot of times people say, well, we don't fell trees. We just work up stuff after storms that's down,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that goes on. But, when you start to think about limbs like this and working in the area with people, this particular scenario is felling, isn't it? It's the same thing as dropping an entire tree, really, because that one limb could put your lights out pretty doggone fast, couldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. In this scenario, I used an open face notch bore cut backstrap just like I was felling a tree on those ones that are sticking way up in the air.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you come across something like this, and I can't see the roots on the lund that's to the left side of it, but it looks like it's uprooted. It's windblown on
Yep.
that looks like the white oak that's in front. And so what can happen there? I know a lot of people don't think about how the roots that may be broken on the backside, it's over on the house, but the roots on the right side of it are still buried. So what kind of effect does that have?
You're going to stand back up, and those roots, some of those roots are probably 12 inches in diameter, bent over.
Yeah, and then you got a situation too. You're trying to not do any more damage to the house structure, which this one may be past that point, but it's something that any more weight that you add to the roof could cause some problems too. So how would you approach that? You say you're going to take limbs off with the same thing as felling, bore cuts and through. Do you start removing limbs or start on the trunks?
I always start at the trunk. I'd get rid of the root ball first, and I work my way up. One thing, I think I learned this from you. I don't like walking miles. So if I can start on one end and take care of everything as I go, that's what I do. Eliminate that weight.
Mm-hmm. And I found out too. We did several things over the years, looking at from the logging standpoint, how you had a high grade hardwood and it had a large canopy, and you tried not to fall it into a limb because that could shatter the trunk. You had a situation of when it goes down, there's pressure that's applied, and some people have shared with us, that pressure in the top comes from the weight of the trunk. So
Yeah.
if you think about that, even though it's on the structure, and sometimes you don't have that much tree on the structure, I know. So it may be that you try to eliminate some limbs, maybe even with a pole saw or something. If you have a lift, you could do that. But either way, when you start to think about the pressure that's on that canopy, the limbs, is coming from the weight of the trunk. So what we always tried to do is, and we would fell the tree and then start working it up to the crown, is to consider that if we reduce weight in the trunk, we're reducing weight on the limbs and the compression in the top. And that in turn in a situation like this is reducing weight off of the house itself. And so, and again, according to how much structure damage that you could identify as to how you would approach that. But to me, if I've got to remove it either way, and I don't have the equipment to be able to lift it, a crane or something like that, then basically you're going to reduce weight as you go. And just like if it's, a trunk that's 20 feet long, I might cut it into movable pieces as it goes up. And I generally always think about starting at the butt and working to the top and taking limbs off as I go. You don't pass any limbs, because when you do that puts you in a possible predicament. And so that's some things to think about. David, how would you look at that? You've worked on quite a number of trees. How would you How would you look at that situation? Where would you start?
First thing I do, well, oh, I'm sorry.
You sound good.
Okay. First thing I look at is I take about 5 minutes and just look around and see for anything that would harm me. I would not cut the trunk first because I would use the root ball. If it has a root ball, I would use the root bar to help stabilize the tree. Because if I cut the trunk, then it may have a tendency to roll as I take limbs down. I would get the easiest limbs first, the ones that are not weight bearing, to take as much weight off the structure and the trunk. And I would, and then I would start taking the limbs off the house, the ones that uh, I felt were safe and not have that did not have any weight bear on them. Once I got down to where I just had weight bearing limbs, then I would maybe go back and cut the trunk to see what it may roll left or right, and then start cutting those weight bearing limbs that are in the ground probably. That one tree on the left looked like it's suspended some. I don't know if that's from the house or from some weight bearing limbs that are in the ground. Of course, they would be my last thing I would cut would be the weight bearing limbs in the ground. Uh, I would just do everything easy first to get as much weight out of the way as I could first, and I would not cut the trunk because I would use the root ball to stabilize the tree, keep it from
I
rolling.
I know every tree is different, but can you be sure that
I have a
that
kind of advantage here because I was me and another fellow, Tommy, was the one that cut those trees off that house. So it's kind of
yeah.
funny that picture's up there.
But if you think about it, and what I see is I see a lot of people think about the root ball as holding. They go up and start taking the limbs. The one's easy, and that big one there would probably be easy. Or they say, well, that one's kind of large. I think I'll leave that. If you go up past that
Uh-huh.
and the root ball doesn't hold, where does it put you?
Oh, it's gonna put you in danger.
Yeah, and if you think about this, I haven't myself. Now I'm not saying that every tree is the same or anything, but it's hard to know that those roots are going to hold, or maybe the tree's been felled and there's hinge material that's holding, or maybe it's split over after a storm. And I found some of them that I look at and I say, they'll hold pretty good. But because of those long limbs or whatever, as you start taking counterbalance off the right side because it was easy, all of a sudden the other limb twisted to the left and the roots come out.
Yeah.
Or either I see a lot of times where people start up maybe closer to the house in this case, start working it back. And what happens is the root ball starts to lift it because the roots are strong, as Chris said a few minutes ago. And so that point, how far can it move left or right as it lifts?
Yeah. I don't think I would approach this tree here. You gotta, as you cut a tree like this, you have to cut it in as balance. You don't cut all the limbs off one side.
Mm-hmm.
You want to work the tree and take the same amount off. Take one off one side, and then go to the other side and take one off. If you feel that the tree may roll,
Mm-hmm.
and then what you said, try to keep the tree balanced in weight as you move back or move towards the top of the tree, every which way you want to end you start on.
All right. Well, let's take for instance if we look right here and I'm thinking that's a limb coming off of that tree. I'm not quite sure. It might even be a tree on the other side of it, Chris, if you remember.
Yeah, that's a limb.
All right. So if we say that the root ball on this one's the same as this, it's uprooted, maybe a few small roots that are in the ground. If we were to sever right here, we would have an out, wouldn't we? In other words, if the root ball was loose and we sever here, then we have an out. If the root ball's not loose, we could cut closer to the root ball and still have an out. And that way, you would know whether this is going to turn or not, and where would you be? Out of the way.
Yeah.
So if you think about this, as long as we're working from the butt end up, and we could drop this limb probably over to this side, we could go to the other side with it using notches and hinges because that's like a tree. I mean, it's capable.
Yeah.
We could even put a line in it, a tip line. You know, even if we're going to cut it with a piece of equipment, you still probably need some control if you're going to take it down in pieces. And so then as we would take that limb off and then we come up here to the next limbs, as long as we don't pass a limb, we have an out, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a thought process some people had kind of shared with me over the years. And let's look at a different one here. And this is the same tree, Chris, or not?
It's on the same property.
So they kind of get to looking like the same, don't they?
Yeah, that's an old, just old property, old trees, beautiful place, and the whole, all of them look like that.
It's the same tree.
Is it?
Yes, you just can't see the house because of the brush. That's the same tree.
Cool.
It looks like the same limb here, and that's the root ball.
Yeah, that's a white oak. I think a white oak and a post oak.
Oh yeah, I see the root ball now.
So, if this one is still attached here with a lot of structure on this side, and possibly the other tree as it came down gave some side pressure to it also. If I take and I cut the root ball off here, then more or less I can be out of the way. I don't have to worry about this rolling. All I have to worry about is the limb structures. And so if we sever here and maybe sever here, that could be taken out of the way with skid steer, no problem. And then you start to look at dropping these limbs. It's just everything can go out to the side and even can be easily cut, because if you get these down, then you can section these and there's no way anything can get back to you. The only exception to that would be a big cedar tree or Douglas fir or something like that, where you've got limbs that are coming backwards. That gets kind of tricky sometimes either way. And also cutting right at the edge of the trunk gives you the ability to reduce a lot of back pressures on the limbs also, because when you start cutting a limb like this, it also has the possibilities of butt rebound, doesn't it? Probably even more than felling, because if this limb right here, if you were to drop it off and it hits this out here, then it could spring back very quickly. So directional felling on these larger limbs is very important to think through. But notches and hinges, again, you can be able to use notches and hinges for the root ball. Because you look at this, if this is a root ball and the roots are still strong, I can notch the bottom, overcut, and allow this to hinge back to the ground, and then reduce that hinge off of it. At that point, this would drop. But all of that's, compression on bottom, tension on the top. And then if it did step in the air because of root structure over something or whatever, then the next one would be the same thing. I've got compression on the bottom and tension on the top. So very easy to get that log out of the way. This can't get to me again. Now I can start to take off these 4 or 5 limbs, drop those down, work them up however I want to. And more or less as I move forward, then I'm reducing weight on the structure, and also I'm out of the way. I always have an escape. Now, if you're on terrain to where you've got a lot of roll potential, then you can also use cribbing or chalk it up, or some kind of rope, or most of the time you can take a piece of limb or whatever, lay down there and keep it from rolling. But it's something to where that's to me more stable than what you have up here trying to figure out eeny, meeny, miny, mo, which one do I cut and it not hit me, right? And
Well, can I make a comment
these
here?
things are dangerous. Sure.
You see all that to the left, okay?
Uh-huh.
And you made a comment, if I take the first 4 down first after I buck the trunk, do I run the risk of those 4 hanging some of that other limbs further up the tree?
Well, it's possible. I can't see from the side there, but when you start to think about, I can directionally fell those limbs. Probably they're 12, 6, 8 inches in diameter or whatever, with notches and hinges. Unless the top is touching in something, you can bring those back to the left, even back towards the root ball, using notches and hinges. But straight out to the side, you have the ability to clear it. It's like we talk about in felling. First thing you do with your information, you're trying to see how wide and how long that tree is, right? So you try to figure out, is it too long? Is it going to hit something? And is it too wide to go between the other trees or miss a structure? And so same thing with the limb. I've got to have a spot that's wide enough and long enough to place that limb, and then I can directionally fell that limb to that position. And it might be that I might use a pole saw or something and take something off that might be touching in the top. But in most cases, you can directionally fell a limb like that away from it touching another limb. And then the other thing too is, if you have a hinge on there, you have the ability to lay that over into another canopy limb and be able to then section that limb and come down. So, but just bucking it off and letting it fall, you don't know exactly where it's going to go. But the other thing too is, what's the danger if you go up there and start taking those smaller limbs out of the way? Because you don't know if the root ball is going to hold. You don't know that counterbalance is going to be on your side when you get up there. So it's much faster too, as Chris mentioned a while ago, is to start working from the tail to the top, and you're only going one direction. And so you can go up through there, take 4 or 5 limbs off. You got other helpers to pull back to the chipper or the truck or whatever. You can be able to take those off and then pull back out. But as you start getting up to the in front of that, those got to fall too. But it's something to where if something does move or something rolls, and one I heard just last week is that there's a broken limb on, let's say, that second one to the left there. You got the big limb going up that we looked at, and then the other one off to the left. Let's say there's a broken limb or a top on that one. Then what do? You get up there working on the others, and that lets loose, and now you get a struck by situation there. If you're back here working towards the top, then everything is clear for you. You always have an out. You always are able to back up away from that. So the only thing you really have to watch out for is back pressures, butt rebounds. And that you watch by what the top's going to hit, or if it's in a spring pull situation. And so it's kind of interesting to think about that way. But let's look at one way. Chris, do you have any other comment on that? Warren?
The only thing I would add is what I'm always looking at now is, what do I have to do to clean this up? The faster that we can work, the faster we can work through things, the more people we can help in the disaster relief world. So if I can face notch these limbs and make them fall so they're not all on top of each other, and it makes it easy for my guy coming through with the machine, we can get this tree done a lot faster. That's the beauty of the face notch with these limbs, laying them where I want them to go instead of where they just want to fall if I just cut them from the top.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then too, if you do section the trunk and you've got a machine coming, a lot of that can be drug back out too to increase safety.
Yeah. No trip hazards. Clean everything up as you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I really like what you said about taking each lead and everything as kind of its own system, planning each one, and taking a look at these 2 trees. This the one that we're looking at now, maybe possibly adding weight to the tree that's impacting the house. It's kind of hard to see just from one picture, but they're definitely influencing each other. So tackling one at a time, and instead of just jumping in and trying to get that first tree off the house, and then continue to look for hazards throughout each process. Like, there could be hangers or widowmakers, and just in the individual these leads, and could be a gas meter in there too. There's a lot of site hazards that need to be investigated as each piece is cut. as you clear more away, the system becomes a little bit more evident on what's going on, and other hazards might be uncovered as you move forward. And so I really like that you mentioned taking each one as its own tree, basically, and working through that plan on each one.
I believe on this one, I think where I positioned this, we could see this area up through here. I believe there's a power line right over here. Too,
Looks like
that's
it.
almost within distance of this limb. If you were to rope it and pull back, you could possibly even, which power line is probably down and off, but it's something to where when you start to look at it, you have, as you say, a lot of different hazards it could be. And that's really that first step that I mentioned a while ago is to have the experience to take that information. The gas lines, the power lines, the broken glass, all that kinds of stuff. And in a lot of cases, if it's a couple of days after the storm, there's generators running, you've got power lines running up through that stuff and all kinds of different things. So you've got, though, let's go back to thinking about, yes, this is up on the house, but what's creating pressure on these limbs? In other words, if you reduce weight in the trunks back here, it's going to do what here?
Continue to reduce weight.
It's going to lessen the load on the structure. So, ideally, if you had a crane or lift or whatever, you get in there and take some of that out. But even putting a lift in this situation with these limbs still capable of moving is kind of tricky. So you want to think about even working a lift, and you could top these and get weight off of it with the lift. There's no doubt about it. And then if you had a machine, you could be able to pull it back. But I'm just talking about from the sawyer standpoint. Getting in here and starting to work this direction, it helps the structure as well as the safety in the process. And so that's typical, isn't it? That kind of a situation you're going to get into.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, look what it looks like.
Now this one, I made some comments, got offline this week, and they had equipment, and this was a training program, and looking at different things. But I think this is an excellent situation to look at here. Is that, as you said, David, you go up and start taking the easy tree limbs, but where's the tree? And you'd look at it and you'd say, well, this one's supporting over here, this one's supporting over there. And really in your evaluation to start with and starting your plan, you're going to look at the entire thing. But most people then start, well, I don't want to get in the ground, so I'm going to start up here on this one, I'm going to work it in. And then next thing you know, you got somebody in there pulling brush and pulling pieces of wood. All this kind of stuff starts to happen. And you're working with the saw up higher, and so fatigue factors start to come in. But I see this all the time, and in a lot of cases, people say, "Well, that's what we use pole saws for," but pole saws just extend about 10 to 12 feet for the operator. And in some cases, unless you're able to get up there close enough to it, you're increasing fatigue factors with pole saws. But a pole saw doesn't keep a 10-foot rollover from hitting you. So you start to think about what does this really look like here? So here's another picture of that tree. It's arched, right? You got limbs there, and instead of taking trunk off, and you don't want to cut the trunk there, do you? Because that's too high.
It's too high. In my opinion, I think this tree is more dangerous than the first tree.
Oh, definitely.
Because it could look like to me, I can't see to the left, but I don't know how much tree is to the left. But it looks like to me, because it's elevated, and it looks like it could roll either way, away from the cutter or to the cutter. So I would have to see the entire tree to really make get an idea of a good plan to take this tree and get it on the ground.
Your wish is my command.
There you go, bro. Thank you. Yeah, I would definitely cut this trunk first, okay? in this situation because it's not attached to the trunk. And I would get this trunk off the weight off because you could tell that the trunk is putting pressure, down pressure on that tree. So I'd cut the trunk first, and it looks like if it's going to roll, it's got a lot more limbs on the left than it does on the right now. So,
Yeah, I think they'd already taken a couple of them off on the right,
yeah,
but you know that trunk, and that's a pretty good sized tree also.
yeah.
You,
I would
and
not let I would not let a beginner cut this tree.
Mhm.
I mean, this would have to be somebody that has some experience.
Well, I think that's what this
Uh,
this class they were doing was about. But
yeah,
it's something though, is that taking even in a class situation, and you start trying to figure out where do I cut this limb, how do I cut that limb. My process and what people have shared with me over the years is if I start back here where that yellow ribbon is and I go up 5 or 6 feet and I start dropping there, I'm not going to cut up above my shoulder. I can notch and hinge that and lower that. Even if it goes the opposite direction, I can take that off. I could have a little stick there beside me. That log is not going to get on my foot or my leg or my ankles or flip at me. I have the opportunity to back away from it. Then I go up and I take another piece, or maybe I decide to go up right before the first limbs, and I start to say, well, the log's pretty heavy, and I think it's going to go down there. Or if I think the top is going to pivot over, that makes it very easy. I can be able to just notch the bottom and overcut and allow it to drop off. I can be out of the way, but I'm not going to, if it's up above my shoulder, I'm not going to do that. So I would move back down the trunk towards the stump and make my getaway a little bit better. And then I would work my way up to the first limbs. Why pass the first limbs? Most people look at it and say, that's going to stabilize, kind of like you think about the roots stabilizing, but you don't know. Because that tree fell down, what's the chances of those limbs being cracked?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah. So when you start thinking about that, I don't know that it's going to stay there. So the first thing to do is let's start at the first limbs, and I always have an out. So I can use notches and hinges. Like that one is probably 5 feet up, 4.5 at least. Wouldn't you say? The first limb there to the left.
Yeah, at least. I would
So
say, yeah, at least
I
5
don't
feet.
have to cut up there next to the trunk at that. What could I do? If you look at where would the compression and tension of that limb be? It would be compression on the left side of it, tension on the right side.
I think if this tree's gonna roll, it's gonna roll towards the cutters. I would not cut that tree on the side they own. I would be on the other side. And
Well,
if
that's
I
what
had
I'm
a
saying.
if I had a piece of equipment, I'd see if it could roll this tree before I even started cutting.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, that's what they
If I had
suggest.
an excavator or a skid steer,
Or
I'd
put a
roll this thing
tagline
from
in it
left
and
to
roll it
right.
over,
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you, it's not really too dangerous when you start thinking about let's look at this cut right here. All right, we either leave this or we decide to take it off, okay, because of the weight. But then I come here, I don't go up here and start cutting. I don't start cutting where he was doing the other limb. I start here at the first limbs. And so if I look at this, I've got weight coming down here. And if it goes down, where's my compression side? The right side of it or left side of it?
Right side.
That could be a little bit back or forward too. We can't see that from this angle.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say my compression side's on this left side. Wouldn't you?
I would.
So I put a little slide notch here. I just go up a foot or two. I put a little slide notch here and I back cut. And this weight's going to take this down. I could even go up here if it's not over, shoulder height. I could come up here, and how far could it move? Well, it's going to go down about 3 feet, 3 or 4 feet.
You're probably gonna cut this limb right there where the arrow's at, and probably that tree's not gonna move.
Uh-huh.
I don't see that
Possibility.
tree moving, cutting that one limb right there. But
Well,
I could be wrong.
if there's no weight or balance on that limb, all you got to do is whack it off, then, don't you?
That's
But you
right.
use a notch in a limb first to see if there's any
Okay.
pressure and movement. But you
10-4.
try to identify compression and then tension. And
Yes.
then I would say it's probably going to lower it down some. If not, if I section this off, it could flip over at that point. But either way, I'm out of the way.
That's
If
true.
it does lower, I go to the next one. And I just continue on up until I cut that little bitty twig down there on the end, and it'll be way down here when I get to it.
Mhm.
Same thing with that on the house. is that if I work my way up there, and that one I wouldn't. I might have messed with a few of those over the years, but I would wait on equipment on something like that, not to mess up the structure. But when you start to look at it, if I go up through there and I spend the time and I take the weight off of that up to the house, there's probably just gutter damage if there hasn't already been wall structure damage. And so you that removing the weight, and here you can play with that same weight that's pressing on those limbs by using notches and hinges either in the trunk or on the limbs to lower it down.
Yeah. Would you go around to the end of that tree? It looked like there's an elevated limb that's pretty much overhead. Would you have a problem with getting that weight off first?
You're talking about like out here?
Yeah, the elevated limb. Would you have a problem cutting that off first to get that weight off?
Well, I don't have a problem with it as long as I'm not passing another limb. You see,
Okay.
if I leave this thinking there's support and I go up there another
Uh-huh.
3 feet to trim these little things off, then where does it put
Mhm.
you?
Well,
And I'm
you
glad
definitely caught.
I'm
But
glad I'm glad you asked that question because
well, see, I was thinking of going. Yeah,
here's
I
the
was
next
thinking of
thing
going all
is
the way around the end of the tree, the other side, the other end of the tree, and cut that suspended limb. Not first, but it's probably my second cut. I'd cut that trunk first,
uh-huh. So
and I
here
think I'd go around and get that suspended limb on the ground, get that weight off, and then come back. But
you see now here's this sawyer and they've already passed one limb,
yeah,
possibly two, right? And they're taking
hmm
the little stuff off the top. And that's not a bad idea because if that thing rolls, this one right here would knock your lights out. Just that little one,
yeah,
wouldn't it? But if I back
hmm
up, whether I'm using the chainsaw or the pole saw, if I was to look at how this one is right here, if I put a notch right here and a back cut right here, what's that going to do? It's going to hinge right down. So why not back up and think about I'll use the pole saw or the chainsaw and we'll work on this limb over here and this one over here, and now the next cut that we have to make is going to be down lower, isn't it? Well, then we come to this one. And so if I wanted to, I could even, once I got up to those limbs, I could section the trunk before that, or after I get these two limbs off, I could section the trunk again and lower it down. Because if that was even up in the air, I can notch the bottom and overcut to allow this to hinge down, and now I drop that off and I got an out. But right
hmm
now, if something rolls, how do you get out of the way? And I think that what they were doing here, according to the message I got back, is they were looking at what those pressures do to get the people to understand where those weights and movements take place.
hmm
And that's a key to training, isn't it?
That's right.
I mean, I think myself that if I start at the butt end and work out, I limit my risk a lot, but I still, if I don't recognize compression and tension, I'm going to be stuck. And I don't want to be stuck.
No.
So you start thinking through it. That's what they were trying to do there. So I think they put themselves in some pictures, but it made a good talk for me anyway. But it's something to where when you start to think through those positions, I see this kind of thing all the time. It's either broken off tops out of a pine, especially in the south, and it blew off a trunk that's 15 feet up there, but there's still 75 feet of tree, and it's got big limbs on it, and
Well,
it's on the ground, but it has potential to roll like crazy. And
it's
then the
like
other one is the root ball that can lift.
it's like you said, in the first training segment, you got to have a plan. In this type of tree right here, you better have a plan before you even crank the saw. You better walk around, you better look, and you better take 5 to 10 minutes to figure out what you're gonna do before you even crank the saw.
Hmm. But I can tell you this is a piece of cake working from the butt out. I mean, it just walks it right down, and it's you can, if you've got a piece of equipment, you figure out what kind of lengths that can lift. So if you've got a 8-foot log you can take out, you section that late 8-foot log, continue working on up, take the limbs off as you go, make yourself another section, and it's very predictable at that point. But when you go out there and just start dropping off limbs, and then the bad part is it's not always the sawyer that gets hung there, because they'll make a few cuts, and then who do they call?
Yeah.
Chris,
Huh?
call Chris.
Somebody pulling brush and picking up pieces, right? Because
Limb draggers.
you're trying to get it into the dumpster or into the chipper.
Yeah.
And so those people are the ones that really get in the danger situation there. And really, there shouldn't be anybody there close at all until the sawyer gets up to that point. And that's what's cool about starting from the butt too, is that you can go up through there and you can cut rounds, you can stop, take a minute break and let them start rolling them. And all of that is open. There's no way. If you take that other tree on the house and you start working that up and you drop those limbs in front because they were easy, and David, I'm not picking on you because that's the same way everybody thinks until they've tried it. But it's something where when you go up there and start taking those easy ones up above, what's the next step? That's when your pullers come in. And when your pullers come in and then something can roll, that's when some struck by situations happen. And so always working from that butt. And loggers have been doing it for ages. And I can tell you story after story to where, people trying to get in a rush and they'll drop a couple trees at a time out in the logwoods. And then all of a sudden they start working from the top back on one of them. And next thing you know, there's a limb that's under pressure. Next thing you know, they cut it off close to the trunk and it comes up and whacks them in the face. I can tell you a friend up in Virginia that ended up that way. And he's got a big metal plate in his head and I think part of his cheekbone. So it's something that was just he had dropped two trees and actually he was a truck driver, came in, was going to help some, so he started limbing them up to finish up the load. He started working back and one of the limbs was off of the oak underneath something else, and when he cut it, that thing flopped back up and caught him right in the face. If he had been working from the butt end on that one, which he already did, he worked from the butt end on the first one, but then he came back and started just walking back towards the stump to section it up and take the other limbs off the second tree, and that's when it got him. But I hear those stories, all the time. But then another one is in storm situations, especially when you got those crisscross trees next to a house. If you take and you start trimming things off, generally you've got limbs that have been under pressure, or you've got little broken pieces or hangers that can come down. And it doesn't always happen real quick, right, when you make a cut. I was watching a video from David Johnson up in Indiana or Illinois. He's up there. He's been working in the woods with trees, planting, and he's got a tree farm. And he cut a I think it was either ash tree or a cherry tree. I think it was the ash tree. No, it was a cherry tree. He cut second, and it was, I bet you, 45 seconds after that tree hit the ground, and he backed up. And a limb about an inch and a quarter came out from how many feet, I don't know, but ended up hitting him in the head. So those things are important to think through, because those struck bys happen that way. Let's see if we have any questions on here. Any comments on that, guys?
Well, I'd like to point something out just mathematically when you're going through your plan on a situation like this. Let's just take a look at these kickstands, for lack of better words, holding up this trunk. In its current state, those would be experiencing half the weight of the entire trunk working back towards the stump. And if you were to cut that stump or the trunk near the stump and it remained freestanding, then you would have transferred the entire weight of that stump or that trunk to those leads. And so as long as there's one point of contact with that trunk, it's distributing the weight by nearly half. So it's just something to think through. If you were to cut that trunk and it's freestanding, and then you try to go cut those leads prematurely, those leads are now supporting the entire weight of the trunk, where the ground was supporting nearly half the weight.
So what are you saying? It's better to take some of the trunk first?
I'm just saying if you do make a cut on the trunk and that's the plan you go with, and it's freestanding, then you have to know that the leads are now taking the full weight of the trunk. and not the ground absorbing some of that weight. If that makes sense.
All right. Well, that log is on the ground.
Correct.
And let's say it weighs 500 pounds. It's putting 500 pounds of pressure on those first two limbs. The other ones aren't touching.
Correct.
If I go up half of that and I take off 250 pounds of log, then how much pressure is on the limbs, more or less?
So say that one more time. If you're taking,
I got a log there from the buddy end up to the first limbs.
yep.
Is 500 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I go up and I say, okay, I'm going to half that. So I'm going to take half of the log length off there. So let's say it's 12 feet. I'm going to take 6 feet. That drops 250 pounds off of the 500 pounds. So did that increase the weight on the two limbs or decrease the weight on the two limbs?
It decreased the weight if you take more than, let's say, half the length of the trunk off.
Yeah.
But if you only take, let's say, a fifth of the trunk off and it becomes freestanding, then you would have added more weight to those leads because it would no longer be in contact with the ground.
Yeah,
But you would still have a majority of the trunk.
But the weight we're taking it off though. But even if you think about now, if I use those limbs and I'm taking weight off to lower the trunk, it's the same weight on the limbs because I'm going to take and I'm going to lower it using those limbs. So there's no added weight to those limbs. But I would take weight off of the trunk before I got to those limbs.
Yeah. As long as the trunk, if you're lowering it and you take more than the estimated, let's say, total weight of that trunk to the leads, if you take more than half of that, you would be, releasing a lot of the weight off of those leads. But if it never touches the ground and you only take a little bit off and then it becomes freestanding off those leads,
then there would be more pressure on the limbs.
Correct, you'd be transferring. Yeah.
But it could
So
pivot over too and reduce.
in the best scenario right there, you want to cut at least halfway up that trunk the first time to avoid what Warren's talking about.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Get that out of there. Skid steer can come in a minute and pick it out of the way. We got a couple questions here. Brian Mead said, what about all the weight when it has to roll once the trunk is cut off? What about all the weight when it has to roll once the trunk is cut off? Well, Brian, to me, and maybe the guys can give their opinion on this, but if I take the trunk off, I really don't care what the top does because I'm out of the way. But it's going to decrease the weight on the trunk, and it's going to decrease the weight on the top. So either way, if I go past that and I start taking limbs off past those two that are on the ground on this particular picture, then I have an issue of a lot of weight could roll and it could move several feet. I mean, that's 4 or 5 feet high. It could move 5 feet to this side to the right or 5 feet to the left, as well as drop 5 feet. But if I think about taking that weight off, I have ability to back out of the way at a 45, and so I'm clear of that situation. I really don't care what happens to the trunk. Even if it comes back, I can be out of the way at a 45. But if I take that log off just before those limbs, the farthest that canopy could come back, unless it's just super loaded against something on the other end, the farthest it could come back is the distance of the limbs, which in this case might be 5-6 feet at the most. So I have the ability to get out of the way. If I leave the trunk on there, and I do as Warren was saying, start taking the limbs off and it's up in the air, now it can move back 6 feet. I have no place to go. So that's the reason why I would section the trunk as I go up to take it off, because I got to do it anyway at some length and some weight for the equipment, and it makes my job a lot safer to go ahead and take those limbs off. Let's see.
Would you cut this tree from the opposite side that they're on because of that first limb? I mean, it's probably not going to happen, but it is possible if you cut it from the side that those two cutters are on. Could that first limb roll over and hit? Or would you cut it from the opposite side, therefore the limb would not be rolling towards you, be rolling away from you?
Yeah, well, this one actually is kind of tripoded. You got it on the ground here, you got this limb down here, and you got this one over here. I would probably say this one may have more pressure on it pushing that way. This one is probably going to be, looking at that other picture we had, is going to be pushing backwards. So if I cut this off here, it really doesn't make any difference to me. I've got an out either way. But I'm like you. I would probably work from this side of that tree. And plus too, I'm not working backwards at that point. If with a chainsaw, unless I've got a wrapped handle, I'm gonna work up this left side, just because of the way the saw is shaped. You know, I can keep it closer to me, work up the trunk, take the limbs off as I go. But wrap handle, I mean, you could probably work from either side pretty well. But as long as I've already taken this off and I start to lower here, it's no big deal. It just goes right down. Years ago, I was up in Chicago. I was doing a thing with a city group, one of the metro areas, and we went out to fell a tree for the class, and they had a poplar tree that was there. We looked at it, but somebody had been, as an old home place, had a big oak tree, probably 40-inch diameter. Limbs on it were probably 12 to 15 inches, and somebody had gone around the outside of it and had given up. They had cut all of the stuff from the top they could reach and from the sides that they could reach. And they said, we're going to have to get the dozer back over here and clean this up. And I said, well, we could probably lower it down. And this thing was up probably 7 feet or 8 feet, okay? It was on these big limbs. And we started looking at it. I said, what if we went on the outside here and the limbs were coming out, you know, and it's kind of supporting the weight in a bow. And so I went around the outside to the right side, and I took the first limb and I put a notch and undercut it, and it came down about 3 feet. I went to the other side, I put a notch and a hinge, I lowered it down another 3 feet, or that side came down 3 feet, and then I took those limbs off again and lowered it another 3 feet, went on up and kept working. I ended up taking all the limbs off of that trunk and lowered it right down to the ground, and then we made a couple cuts, and they said we'll get the rest of it with the backhoe. You know, so it's something to where it's amazing what you can do with notches and hinges. And most people that come across something like this, whether it be with a pole saw, and a pole saw you can use notches and hinges also. But whether it be a pole saw or a chainsaw, if I just cut through that, I don't know whether it's going to twist as I start to cut. I don't know whether I've got control there. Chris, you got to head out?
I do.
Any other comments on this? You kind of summarize what you would do.
I'm right there with you. I would come on this left side, and I would start at the trunk, and I'd work my way up. I wouldn't pass any limbs, and pretty easy tree.
I think so.
Yes, sir.
But you know, every tree's different.
Yep.
So I go back to what David said. We need to have a good plan before we start it, and that's really the ticket. Is thinking about the possibilities. But you know what I found is there's very few people, and Soren's the one that got me started on this, because we were teaching delimbing and bucking of high quality hardwoods and pines, and so you start thinking about that process. I fell the tree. I try to get as low a stump as possible. It's up on limbs as you go out there, and you start figuring it out. And there's limb locks you can use, there's offset cuts you can use, there's notches and hinges you can use, and it's amazing how you can just walk up through there and be able to control that and be completely safe at all times, even on steep terrains. I mean, you know, you get into steep terrains and things, and placement of the tree first can help, and then after that, thinking through how you can chalk stuff up or be able to manage the pieces that way. And always have a clear.
That's the key. Go home.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Y'all have a
good
good
trip.
evening.
Bye,
Going
Chris.
to North Carolina here.
Yeah.
All right.
Chainsaw training.
Very good, sir. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Yes, sir.
Warren, any other thoughts on it?
No, I think those are great. And the only reason why I mentioned the if the base or the trunk became freestanding, just if somebody was to plan this tree and they ran into that issue, to be just wary that that would become a hazard at that point, with the amount of weight those leads would be experiencing. And so I agree 100% with what you guys are saying. Working from the base to the top and lower it as you go, especially when you get to those leads. And I kind of like what you said. maybe it's necessary to lower it some on one side, and if you can access a lead and still have a good escape path, um, work it down on the other side and gradually bring it down and reduce the chance of rollover.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're close, in other words, if it's lower to the ground than this one, is thinking about notches and hinges right at the trunk. And that's the place you can see the movement the quickest. When you go out the limb, you can have quite a lot of movement on smaller limbs, especially they'll come back and flap you, And you start thinking about offset cuts can be used close to the trunk. And one that it's an offset we called a limb lock. And in that, you would cut in parallel to the trunk, come out about a half an inch, cut in, and you've got a vertical passing of those fibers. It creates a little Z shape that locks it into that cut because the fibers are going out of the limb at an angle. And that can keep it there to where if it does roll on the ground, it gives you some support there, but if it rolls, it's disconnected.
Mm.
And so there's some different cuts that you can use on that. But I tell you, when you really start to think through it, going from the butt, and I have had situations to where some of the root balls, like David you said, are to stabilize, but there you can really see what it is, because if you can't see it, I've had so many of them that all of a sudden you take one of those larger limbs off and the whole thing rolls. So it's important to think through, disconnect those, because so many times too, like if this one was still connected, it was going to stand back up. If I go up there to the limbs, let's say, and I cut the trunk off, that trunk goes all the way back up. Is it necessarily going to go straight, or can it sideswipe me as it goes?
Well,
I don't know. So that's the reason why we always try to take it off to begin with, let that stump go back to where it lived before, and then we can work the trunk up. And that in storm cleanup on power lines and that kind of stuff, working with linemen and all, that's a key factor. So kind of interesting. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate you dropping by tonight. Thank you for sitting in on it. I don't mean to sound too adamant about those things, but what I suggest with everybody is, first of all, those 5 steps we talked about, looking around for any hazards, making sure up and down, side to side, back and forward is calculated as you start to make a cut, and that movement of the tree or limb as it starts to cut. Every cut that you make, you've got to have that plan in your head, because if not, that unplanned event can happen. And plus, it's dangerous enough for the sawyer, but keep people away from it until you've got things lowered and stabilized.
That's right.
Because so many times in cleanup operations, that's when helpers get hurt. And so be cautious of that.
And know when to walk away sometimes.
Yep. Yeah, and sometimes, when you've got equipment, it's ridiculous to do it all, hard labor, isn't it? So I mean, when you've got the lifts and you've got the skid steers and cranes and all kinds of stuff to work with, that's the key. So think about that.
Yeah, and I also at the beginning, I like what we talked about, and a lot of times equipment does make it easier, and you kind of expand your capabilities. But with that equipment, there comes a whole nother planning process on keeping people safe and some more dynamics going on there.
Yeah. Well, all right, gentlemen, thanks for dropping by. I think we got. Let me check one more time here.
Thank you for having us.
John Tittle said, "Looks like a fun project. We've always started with any limb that's in the air, and we would always leave any branch touching the ground or house." And so hopefully I see some possibilities there, John. So maybe. And got several people watching tonight, so I'm sure some more will be checking in on the video. But I'll get these things posted, and I guess since I didn't have any sound there to begin with, I better go over a little bit of the classes we have coming up. But thank you all very much, and we will see you next week, hopefully next Thursday.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Make a plan on it.
Take care,
All right.
Tim.
All right.
And
Thank
Dave,
you,
you too.
See
You too,
David.
Warren.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
So I just want to quickly go back over. Don't forget the Zoom training workshops, and that's Basic Chainsaw will be on February the 28th at 7 p.m. And you can send me a message, info@forestapps.com, or you can take and just go to our e-store and sign up for it. And then also be putting in your plans April 2nd through the 4th. We have in Kingston, Georgia, a storm sawing workshop, 3-day hands-on workshop. And so we'll be at the Breeden farm and be working on some trees over there. And so that's available for April 2nd and 4th. And then the end of April, the storm sawing workshop in Carty Berry Farm, which is Dry Fork, Virginia, that Chris will be doing. And so that's April 25th through the 27th. And so those are available. And you can check out a little bit of information on our e-store or send me a message at info@forestapps.com. And then any other types of training, whether it be maintenance, reduced downtime, sharpening, or talking about different things of bucking, limbing, and falling, I'd be glad to chat with you about some different things and can put together classes if you've got employees or groups that might be interested. So please keep that in mind. And info@forestapps.com on that too. So thank you for coming by tonight. Appreciate everybody dropping in. And we'll be back next Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Thursday Night Saws. And I wish all of you good sawing this week.